I'd like to place you in what Piaget called cognitive conflict. Piaget believed that cognitive conflict is when our view of reality gets a bit turned upside down. Then, as we recover, we learn something new. To initiate this conflict, let's ask one simple question. How is learning similar to evolution? Piaget's idea of schema can be compared directly to the biological idea of species. Schemata are sets of ideas that develop and evolve throughout the lifetime of a person. Similarly to the great multitude of species, a person's schemata adapt, but instead of adapting to changing environmental conditions like plants and animals do, schema adapt in relationship to other schema, to new inputs through our senses, to brain conditions, and to other learners with whom a person is in contact. Take, for instance, the schema of milk as food that a baby thinks about right after she enters this bright world. As the baby grows and learns more about food, the schema develops into bread as food, and so forth. Piaget referred to the adaptation and evolution of schemata as assimilation and accommodation. The modifications to schema goes on and on. We can also gain some insight from Vygotsky's theory of zone of proximal development. He felt that learning develops in bursts. In evolution of species, theorists call it punctuated equilibrium. In the brain, Vygotsky believed that the mind encounters a stress and the brain is required then to push forward through this zone of proximal development. When we get past the stress, a new equilibrium occurs and the individual has learned something new, like riding a bicycle. Of course, the same thing happens in nature. Some scientists believe that punctuated equilibrium drives the development of species. Species adapt to new environmental stresses, and just like the new schema in your brain, new forms of species and genera appear on the earth. What good is making a comparison between learning and evolution? That brings us to tip number 1. Use good metaphors. Now, you may not want to compare learning with evolution with your students. Instead, use metaphors and analogies your students know well. They need to have already developed ideas around the metaphors. Metaphors take existing schema and binds them to new ideas, which helps to create new schema. The brain accommodates and has learned something new. One could say a new species of thought has developed. Number 2, allow some stress. John Medina in Brain Rules emphasizes that students need some stress. Help your students know that they can overcome the challenge. Don't give them something too difficult to handle. However, they need to struggle through Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Give them time, give them some scaffolding, but not too much and not too little. Have confidence. A new set of species flourished after the stress of the Ice Age. Your students will make it through the challenge too, with new schema flowering on the other side. Number 3, start simple and build on ideas. Evolution didn't start with an elephant. Over the eons, more simple creatures developed into the elephant. We don't need to start with a lionfish. Just a goldfish will do. Similarly, the schemata that develops in young people's brains will assimilate and accommodate as new information builds. As the schemata develops, their brains will adapt and the ideas will grow more interesting and more complex. Number 4, draw pictures. In evolution, a species adapts when presented with a new niche, such as a flock that finds itself on an island. The schemata in our students' minds must adapt to the images we give them. As Piaget explained, the schemata assimilates or accommodates the new data. Nature adapts, the mind adapts. Like using metaphors, when we successfully integrate new imagery into our schemata, we learn something new. Presley and McCormick explained that material that is easy to image is recalled more easily. Use graphic organizers. Draw pictures. Number 5, work together. Brains develop with other brains. Evolution doesn't happen in isolation. The host of creatures have become what they are because of those who live around them. Carnivores live in relationship with herbivores. Plants depend on animals. Our brains don't work in isolation either. Presley and McCormick emphasized in the light of the Vygotskian model that working together cooperatively in a caring environment enriches learning. Number 6, make sure your students stay healthy. Teach good eating, sleeping, and exercise habits, and model them. The evolution of natural systems has depended on some really basic environmental conditions. If they weren't there, life wouldn't have happened. The Earth's biosphere needed the right amount of sunlight, water, and earth. Our brains must also have the fundamentals in place for us to learn and for our brains to grow properly. Medina points out the importance of exercise, sleep, and exploration. Under the right conditions, our brains adapt and we can learn. Taking what we've learned from brain science will help us become more effective teachers. If biologists were to manage the creatures of the earth on gut instinct, how far would they get? Teachers must also use science to understand how to teach effectively. The earth is a beautiful, amazing place, and so are the minds of every one of our students. We can learn from the evolution of species, brain science, and models of human development for some great tips to help our students' minds be every much as beautiful as a rainforest, the mountains, grasslands, or the oceans we find here on planet Earth.